Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and it's week 18, time for the running back rankings for the final week of your championship. Most of you are probably not watching. You've probably already finished playing, and if you're still playing, this is a big reason why you should not be playing in week 18. It's just not the same. There's teams that aren't vying for the equal playoff hopes, and there's a lot of players that if they're not 100% are just going to sit out as well. So let's go over some strategy. There's 4 teams that you have to worry about on offense regarding benching starters. The Eagles are definitely going to be benching starters. Saquon will not play. So Kenny Gainwell actually is very valuable behind him. The Rams also expected to bench starters. So Blake Corum would be the guy. Kyren Williams will not get any reps, most likely. The Chiefs also planning to bench starters, according to reports, if they do suit up a 1 or 2 drive type of game. So not expecting anyone really. Isaiah Pacheco was dealing with a rib injury in the first place. Kareem Hunt, I would not expect to be on the field. Samaje Perine and Carson Steele, though, might really have a good game. I still think the Chiefs will try to beat Denver as best they can. The Buffalo Bills will also be benching starters after a couple of drives. There's no way they make it past the first quarter. If anything, it's just 1 or 2 drives max for the Buffalo starters, just to keep the streak going of consecutive starts in that offense. But the Chargers may or may not be benching starters. It all depends on the Steelers game. If the Steelers win, then the Chargers are kind of just locked in to the 6th seed. No need to start anyone. So J.K. Dobbins might be rested if that's the case. But if the Steelers lose, then the Chargers can win the 5 seed, and that matchup on the road at Houston is way, way better than a second matchup against the Ravens, this time in Baltimore. So the difference between the 5 and the 6 seed determines the Chargers' plan, and if the Steelers lose, then you can trust J.K. Dobbins. If not, I would be benching Dobbins for sure. The Texans, surprisingly, there's nothing that they can change in terms of their seeding, but according to reports, they will be starting everyone. I don't really understand why, but they have been playing pretty badly lately. Maybe it's just to try and get some type of rhythm going into the playoffs. So those are the 6 teams that have at least a question mark. It's really the Eagles, the Rams, the Chiefs, and the Bills who I'd be most concerned about. Maybe on Saturday, we will get more clarity regarding the Chargers. But let's get into these rankings. I'm not going to go too into depth on matchups. If you are really dying to see that chart, you can go to last week's video. It really didn't change much. I'll mention the best matchups and the worst matchups individually in this video. Let's get going. The high-end tier are all elite must-starts. I think Jonathan Taylor versus Jacksonville is playing the best of any running back right now, and his volume is too secure to bench. I absolutely envision Joe Flacco to continue getting him the ball at a massive rate. Over the last 2 games, Jonathan Taylor has a total 63 touches, 2 receptions, 354 yards, and 5 total touchdowns. In the last 2 games, that's 33.2 fantasy points per game in those last 2 weeks. So I'm kind of annoyed that it took this long for it to happen, but Taylor is that guy and definitely that valuable. When he plays elite like this, there's no chance you're benching him. So the number 1 running back this week is Jonathan Taylor. If he somehow was on your team in the playoffs, then he has helped you cruise to victory. Number 2 is Bijan Robinson versus Carolina. The Panthers have been the best matchup all year long for opposing running backs in fantasy. They give up a ton of yards, at least 150 on the ground per game, and this is a must-win for the Falcons. It's also at home, and the last 2 games with Michael Penix, Bijan Robinson is a workhorse, especially on the goal line. Bijan has 44 touches total, that's 22 per game, 5 catches, 201 yards, he's averaging 100 yards per game, and also 4 total touchdowns. He has 2 in each of the last 2 games, and that's an average of 23.3 points per game. You have to start Bijan Robinson. You also have to start Jahmyr Gibbs versus the Vikings. He's my running back 3, and it's a must-win game versus the Vikings, and it's also at home. I expect Gibbs to be prolific in this one. I expect a shootout as well. While the Vikings have been a bottom 3 matchup for running backs all season, with no Montgomery, I really don't care. Gibbs will be dominant, and this game will probably have a total of 70 points, if not more, on the scoreboard when it's all over. So Gibbs will definitely play well. He will go over 100 yards, just like last week in a touchdown. In his last 2 games without Dave Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs has 49 touches total. That's 25 per game. 8 catches, that's 4 in each game, a total of 317 yards, that's almost 160 per game, and 2 total touchdowns, an average of 23.9 points per game. The only reason I rank him behind Bijan is because his matchup is more difficult. But number 4, we have Josh Jacobs versus Chicago, who's technically questionable. He was limited in practice yesterday, but I'm not worried about it. I do expect him to play. It's a must-win for the Packers in order to avoid the 7 seed at Philadelphia. So unless it's the second half and the Commanders are just blowing out the Cowboys, I don't envision the Packers to be benching starters unless they're also blowing out the Bears themselves. So it could be like that Saints game where he plays so well in the first half that they just sit him in the second because they don't need him. However, if that happens, Jacobs is still going to approach 20 points. So not going to bench him. Jacobs will dominate the Bears. They're a top 5 matchup for running backs this season as well. Then at number 5, we have Bucky Irving versus the Saints, who's technically questionable, was limited in practice on Wednesday, but expect him to play. I'm not worried about it. It's a must-win game for Tampa in order to lock up the division and that playoff spot. So I do think they'll win. Last week, Bucky Irving really dominated this backfield. He had 24 touches, 4 of them were catches for a total 190 yards. That's 21 fantasy points. He did not find the end zone, but still went over 20 points. He is a must start. If you have Bucky Irving, he probably helped you make it to the fantasy championship, if not win it straight out. But number 6, I think we're dropping down a tier. I think we're no longer in that guaranteed 20-point projection. Now it's probably going to be a little bit less. But number 6, I think, is a must start for sure. Tony Pollard probably is going to play. He did not suit up last week. However, he was already limited in practice on Wednesday, and I would expect him on the field. He also has massive incentives this week. Tony Pollard needs 83 rushing yards to get a $250K bonus. I expect that to happen, along with a $250 bonus if he scores 2 touchdowns. So if this is the stat line you're getting, 85 yards and 2 touchdowns from Tony Pollard, then he will go over 20 points. I definitely envision a scenario where he tries to win another $500,000 this week. So definitely expect Pollard to be a workhorse. Tyjae Spears also has a concussion and is not expected to play. There's also a 70% chance of rain on Sunday in Nashville. Tony Pollard will at least get the volume to give himself a chance for that to happen. So I definitely would be starting Tony Pollard in my lineup week 18. Number 7, I'm also going to start Aaron Jones at Detroit. The Lions defense has been good against running backs this season so far, but at the moment their defense is really depleted and it's going to be a shootout no matter what. I expect Aaron Jones to play. While he was limited with a quad injury on Wednesday, I'm not worried about it. I think he'll be on the field, and I would expect the Vikings to score at least 30. So Aaron Jones probably has one of those touchdowns. I would be starting Aaron Jones for sure. At number 8, I'm also going to start Joe Mixon at Tennessee. Well, a few days ago, I would have expected them to bench him for the sake of keeping their players healthy. They have no shot of changing their playoff seed. It sounds like he's going to play, and there's also some contract incentives for Mixon as well. He needs 107 rushing yards for a $250K bonus. That's kind of a lot, but definitely something he's done this season before, and I would expect them to give him the ball and a chance for that to happen. So I do think Mixon will be going over 100 yards this week. He's healthy, and as long as he's active, then bet on him. It sounds like they will not be benching Joe Mixon, but that offense has been brutal. I still kind of don't trust touchdowns in Houston that much. So that's why I have Mixon behind Aaron Jones. I think Jones will find the end zone. I can't say for sure that will happen with Mixon. At number 9, we have J.K. Dobbins at Las Vegas, who I think will play. I think it's a must-win in order to avoid that Ravens matchup. They need to win to have a chance at the 5 seed, but if the Steelers lose, then maybe they bench Dobbins before the game kicks off. So that's something you need to keep in mind. But Gus Edwards isn't practicing again, and I'm not expecting him to suit up. Dobbins should be the guy. And in week 1 against Las Vegas, he only had 10 rush attempts, but turned that into 135 rushing yards and a touchdown. The Raiders defense will not be able to stop him. So love J.K. Dobbins. As long as the Chargers start everyone with a chance at the 5 seed, I would be starting Dobbins. He's a top 10 play this week. I'm also going to start Kenny Gainwell for sure. Against the Giants, it's been a top 5 matchup all season for opposing running backs. So I think Gainwell is a must start. They are going to be benching Saquon Barkley, and Will Shipley has been questionable for multiple weeks now. I don't think he splits that much time with Will Shipley. Kenny Gainwell will probably get 18 plus touches this week against the Giants. So a must start, in my opinion, a very high ceiling type of player. Number 11, we have Isaac Guerendo at Arizona. And last week, Guerendo had 13 touches. 4 of them were catches for 99 yards. And with Josh Dobbs, they probably lean on Guerendo a little bit more. So I think Guerendo's a must start. The starting running back in San Francisco always has value in fantasy, and right now there's no concern that Patrick Taylor is a threat at all. So definitely start Isaac Guerendo at RB11. I expect at least 1 touchdown against the Cardinals. At number 12, I'm also going to start Rico Dowdle versus Washington. And last week without CeeDee Lamb, while the offense was terrible, he still was a workhorse. 24 touches, 1 of them was a catch, a total of 108 yards, and 11.3 points, was a top 15 running back in fantasy last week. So I think you have to start Rico Dowdle. You know for a fact he'll play the entire game, and in week 18, that's kind of all you can ask. I think Dowdle has a very safe floor and possibly goes over 100 yards. Again, I would be starting Dowdle, expecting double digits, even without a touchdown. Number 13, I think the last must start this week would be Blake Corum versus Seattle, and it's a must win for them in order to lock up the number 3 seed, which would be a matchup at home versus the Commanders or potentially Green Bay, the Packers. That is a far easier matchup than getting the 4 seed and having to face the loser of the Vikings and Lions games. So maybe they think they can win either. They don't really care. Maybe they want the Lions matchup or the Vikings matchup. But if I was a part of the Rams, I would much rather get the 3 seed and the Commanders rather than the 4 seed, and potentially the Lions or Vikings, whoever loses on Sunday night. So that's why I think they will try to win. Obviously, Sean McVay will dial up a good game plan, and with no Kyren Williams expected on the field, we could see 80+% of snaps going to Blake Corum. I could literally see like 95% of the touches going to the rookie. So he's been dying to get on the field. I think he's really talented, and I do think they can still beat the Seahawks with Jimmy Garoppolo and Blake Corum. So maybe you disagree, but I think Blake Corum is a very safe play this week. In fantasy, at least, he should be in your lineup a top 15 running back for sure. Then we're dropping down a tier, and I still see some very high upside with some of these players, but there are some question marks regarding their status. Like Ameer Abdullah had over 20 touches last week, and he has a foot injury. He did not practice on Wednesday. Maybe it's just rest. He is one of the oldest players at running back in the NFL. So maybe he'll suit up. If he does, I think he's a must start. He's well overtaken Alexander Mattison. In a potential swan song game, I would expect Abdullah to play his best. So the last 3 games, he's averaging 15 touches per game on 45 touches total on 15 catches. That's an average of 5 receptions per week and almost 100 yards per game. Just shy of that, he has 298 total yards in the last 3 games, along with 2 touchdowns in that span as well. So Abdullah is on fire, an average of 16.4 fantasy points per game. I started him 2 weeks ago. It helped me advance to the championship round, but I actually benched him last week for Isaac Guerendo, and that was the wrong call. Abdullah had by far a better game over Guerendo. So if he's active, I think you have to start him. It's just a question of will he actually suit up? That foot injury might keep him out. But given it's the likely last game for Antonio Pierce, or at least that's possibly the case, the Raiders are going to play hard for him. I do expect Abdullah to have a lot of touches and be effective. Against the Chargers, I would be starting Ameer Abdullah as long as he's healthy enough to play. At number 15 and 16, though, I see major ceilings for both of these players. I have both of the Ravens running backs back-to-back here. Justice Hill, I do have ranked higher. Versus Cleveland, it's a decent matchup I'm not worried about at all, but he is questionable. He is still in the concussion protocol, and that's why he did not practice on Wednesday. But on Thursday, he didn't practice either. However, according to John Harbaugh, he would have been out there, at least limited, if he was not sick. He was out with an illness, not the concussion, on Thursday. So Friday is going to be important regarding his status. And if he's available, if he clears the concussion protocol in time, I think we're going to get a massive game from Justice Hill because he has multiple contract incentives. If he has the game of his life in the passing game, Justice Hill could make $1 million on Sunday. He needs 8 catches for $500,000. That's a very enticing incentive, and he is a pass catcher. We have seen him get like 6 or 7 catches previously. I wouldn't expect that to be impossible. I think they're going to try and get him that number if he's available. So that's a reason to start Justice Hill for sure. But then if he goes over 117 receiving yards as well, he would also get another $500,000. So those two numbers work together, and if he does get 8 catches, I could easily see him go over 100 total yards, at least receiving. So I think he could be a 20-point type of option this week. If he also adds a touchdown, you will get a top 5 game from Justice Hill. It's definitely possible for that to happen. However, they're still going to get Derrick Henry involved as well, while they probably rest Henry in the second half because they're going to be leading by a massive number against Cleveland. They're 18-point favorites last I checked. Henry will be involved early on because he needs one more touchdown for $500 as well, and they're definitely going to get him that touchdown. I think as soon as it happens, he probably sits on the bench, and I think they save him as much as possible for next week in the playoffs. But it's a must-win to lock up the division, so I expect them to set up that blowout early on, and Derrick Henry will be leaned on in the first quarter. Second quarter, third, and fourth, if Justice Hill is there, he will get a ton of catches and really produce good numbers in fantasy. So I'd be starting both of them. I think Henry is more of a floor play, and at the moment, I think he's a bit safer given Justice Hill's injury status. But if Justice Hill is active, then I probably would bump down Henry maybe to the bottom of this tier outside the top 20, because I'm not expecting a lot of touches for him after he gets that touchdown. But if you're guaranteeing a touchdown, you're also probably going to get at least 30, 40 yards from Henry, and maybe he plays into the third quarter. That is always possible. So I think I'd still be starting Derrick Henry, probably still going to be in my lineup, but maybe Justice Hill really steals the show, given there's $1 million at stake for Justice Hill. But with 500 on the line, Derrick Henry definitely scores a touchdown. He will go over 10 points, in my opinion. At number 17, I have Zack Charbonnet at the Rams. And while there are no contract incentives for him, we know for a fact that Geno Smith is really dying to play well. He has $6 million at stake here. If Geno throws for over 186 yards, he gets $2 million. If Geno wins the game, he gets another $2 million. And then there's one other aspect. I think it's a 66% completion percentage that also gives Geno Smith another $2 million. So the catch percentage one also really points to Zack Charbonnet getting a lot of targets, because if you throw it to the running back, it's a lot more likely that that catch does not get dropped. So I think Charbonnet will play very well, but it's going to be mainly in the passing game. And just like Justice Hill, there could be a huge, huge fantasy number for Charbonnet this week. Kenneth Walker's on IR, so Charbonnet gets all of the touches here. I definitely would be starting Charbonnet. I'm kind of tempted to rank him above Derrick Henry, but last week against the Bears in a very good matchup, he did not play well, and that's my only hesitation. It's a must-win for the Rams in this scenario. So not my favorite play, but definitely safe enough to start a top 20 running back for sure. Number 18, we have Jaylen Warren versus the Bengals, who's been really coming alive lately. Even without any touchdowns, Jaylen Warren is fantastic. An average of 102 yards from scrimmage the last 2 weeks and 5 receptions per game as well. He's averaging 16.5 total, and 5 of them are coming in terms of catches. So love the floor for Jaylen Warren. He will go over double digits. And against the Bengals, it's a must win for that number 5 seed. It's a way better matchup at Houston as opposed to at Baltimore. I think Warren will be definitely contributing a lot this week. So I don't really fear the Bengals defense. They usually give up rushing touchdowns, and I would expect Warren to get the bulk of volume. He's been way more involved than Najee the last 2 games. So he's earned my trust. In terms of a floor play, I do expect Warren to go over 12 points. He's averaging 12.7 the last 2 games. At number 19, I have Tank Bigsby at the Colts. And the Colts are a top 10 matchup for running backs on the season. We just saw them get demolished by the Giants, and they even gave up a lot of points to the Titans the week before. So the Colts do not scare me at all. And Tank Bigsby back in week 5 torched them himself. He only had 14 touches. One of them was a catch, but a total of 129 yards, as well as 2 touchdowns. He scored 25.4 points in half PPR back in week 5 at home versus Indianapolis. This game is on the road, but still, I don't really care. The Colts matchup is a really good spot here for Tank Bigsby. So I think he's overtaken Travis Etienne. I definitely would trust him more this week. I'd be starting Bigsby as a low-end RB2 with plenty of upside. He could score another 2 touchdowns. Wouldn't shock me at all. Then we have DeVon Achane at the Jets, who's just not the same player without Tua Tagovailoa. We're expecting Tyler Huntley to be the quarterback because Tua is trying to avoid surgery, and that's not a good sign for his health this week. So it's a must-win. They need it to have any shot at the playoffs. They also need some help with Denver losing, but still, I do think the Dolphins will try their best. They're definitely not trying to lose, that's for sure. But in 6 games this season with Tyler Huntley, DeVon Achane is not the same player. His volume drops to only 16 touches per game and only 4.2 receptions per game. He's catching over 6 per game with Tua. So not good for fantasy. Also, his efficiency comes down, an average of only 71 yards per game. Last week, it was brutal, and we expected in the wind for him to be more efficient against Cleveland. So really let you down. He also has 3 touchdowns in those 6 games, though. So that's what's really padding these numbers. An average of 12.2 points per game, but more so a 9-point average if you do not get a touchdown. So not expecting a high ceiling from Achane, just a floor play, but probably still gives you 9-10 points. And that's why at running back 20, I think from a safety standpoint, I'll bet on the volume. In a must-win game, I expect Achane to probably be fine. Number 21, though, Breece Hall versus Miami in the same game. I am a bit worried just on his lack of efficiency this season. He's been brutal, and I don't really see the tide turning at all. But I will mention this. Breece Hall needs 181 yards to hit 1,000 rushing yards on the season. And last year, they tried really hard to get him that, and he still didn't hit it. He had only 996, if I recall correctly. So I don't expect Breece Hall to give you 180 plus yards this week, but maybe he does go over 100 in an attempt to make it possible. Like if they get to the third quarter and he's gone over 100, then yeah, they probably just funnel him touches in the fourth and give him a shot. But if they reach the third and he only has like 50 yards, then I say there's no reason why that would happen. So you could really get burned by Breece Hall again. He's been pretty mediocre the last few weeks. Then we have Austin Ekeler at number 22, who is expected to come off of IR. He's been out for over 4 weeks now, but he is full in practice on Wednesday. So expect him to play. Brian Robinson Jr. has been pretty brutal lately, so I think Ekeler could really slot in here. And they've been relying on some low-end pass catchers. Eckler's definitely more of a preferred option for Jaden Daniels in the target share. So I think if he plays, I would prefer him as the most valuable Commanders running back. I don't see why they would put him on a snap count. They need the win in order to lock up the 6 seed. I don't think they want the 7 seed. That would be a road matchup at Philly, and there's a chance they either get the Buccaneers or the Rams if they're the 6 seed, and that's definitely a more enticing matchup than the Eagles for the 3rd straight time this season. So while they have shown they can beat Philadelphia, that was without Jalen Hurts, and I'm sure they'd rather avoid it if they can. So the Commanders will definitely try to win. I think Ekeler will be the safest, most involved running back they have. But number 23, I think, is the last player I'm definitely starting if I have. I think the last player to expect 10 plus points from. We have Tyrone Tracy at Philadelphia, and while technically it's a meaningless game, they are trying to improve their draft pick. At least the fans want them to, but I really don't think the players in the locker room give a shit about getting the better draft pick next season. I think just like last week, they're going to try their best to win. So Tyrone Tracy is more involved than Devin Singletary. While sometimes he gets vultured by him, I still think Tracy would be the start here. I'd expect a safe double-digit floor from Tyrone Tracy. And against the Eagles' backups, maybe he finds Pater as well. I think 11, 12 points is not an egregious projection from Tyrone Tracy. But last week, running back really disappointed us. There were less than 10 players that went over 12 points last week. That was pretty shocking at running back but it did let us down a lot. So maybe my expectation is a little too high on some of these projections here if last week repeats. But I think from a safety standpoint in a 12-team league, I think the top 23 running backs are the safest to find. But at 24, I think we're dropping down a tier significantly, and there's way more risk involved, but these flex plays are pretty enticing. There is a path for success with all of them. At number 24, I got Khalil Herbert at Pittsburgh, and it's a must-win game for the Bengals. And at the moment, I am not expecting Chase Brown to play. He has an ankle sprain. It's a high ankle sprain, reportedly. And while he is trying to tough it out, at the moment, he's not practicing, and I really can't envision Chase Brown making it back on the field with a high ankle sprain after just 1 week. So that's why I think Khalil Herbert will be the guy. He has played very poorly since joining the Bengals this season, but that Bengals offense is very valuable, and I would still expect plenty of volume, and a touchdown is always possible. So while you are hoping for the best with a lot of risk here, I think Khalil Herbert has one of the highest ceilings remaining in these rankings. At 24, I'd consider it at flex if you're desperate. At number 25, we have Rachaad White versus New Orleans, and Bucky Irving is questionable, but I do expect him to play, and Rachaad has lost a lot of ground to the rookie over the last few weeks. Mainly just as a pass catcher this season, Rachaad White offers mostly target appeal, and in full PPR, he is a safer start, but Rachaad in the last 2 games has not been safe. He doesn't have a touchdown. That's been drying up mostly, and only 17 touchdowns with 8 catches. That's less than 10 per game. So I'm not dying to start him. He has 94 yards in that stretch, so less than 50 per game as well. And an average of only 6.7 points per game is not very good. But the Saints are a very good matchup. They can't really stop receivers. So it's a question of what the volume will be like. I would rather go Bucky Irving and only consider Rachaad a low-end flex play. Not excited to start Rachaad, but obviously on name value, you could do worse. I'd probably keep him there. In a must-win, maybe he scores another touchdown. At number 26, I have Najee Harris versus the Bengals, and it's a must-win for them, but they probably don't get it. I think the Bengals will win. And lately, Jaylen Warren has been way more involved than Najee. Najee's volume has fallen to only 12 touches per game, and with very little work in the passing game, he's really reliant on touchdowns, which have not been hitting. Just like Rachaad White, Najee Harris is only averaging 6.7 points per game, and with less PPR value, he's really reliant on just getting you yards and doing it that way. So I'm not expecting a touchdown from Najee. Maybe it happens and I'm wrong. It could work out, but I think generally speaking, Najee is just a floor play this week, and odds are he does not go over 10 points. So I'd rather pass. I kind of feel like I'm ranking him too high. I think there's players behind him who have higher upside, but against the Bengals, maybe he does find pay dirt, and that's what I'd bet on with Najee. At number 27, we have Samaje Perine at Denver, and this is a revenge game for him. He was on the Broncos roster up until the beginning of the season, and Pacheco's going to be out. I'm also expecting them to bench their starters, so Kareem Hunt probably doesn't play very much, and I think Perine has very sneaky upside. I think Carson Wentz can still get this offense rolling, and I do think Andy Reid will get Perine the ball early and often this week, so I expect a lot of receptions for him. He can be efficient. We've seen him play very well in the past when he was a Bengal, and against the Broncos, I could see Samaje Perine really ruining their season with a good game. So very sneaky upside. I'm actually tempted to rank him even above Khalil Herbert, but I think at 27 with a lot of unknown factors in the Chiefs offense this week, I'd probably pass at 27. Maybe you'll be tempted, but only in DFS would I probably do it. At 28, I'm also probably going to bench DeAndre Swift, but maybe you're desperate enough. If you have him, you probably did not make the championship because Swift has been bad, and there are some reasons for him to play well this week, but I really doubt it happens. He needs 106 rushing yards to crack 1,000. I really doubt that works out. The Bears can barely run the ball, but it is worth noting in the first game versus the Packers earlier this season, I believe it was week 12, he had 84 total yards and a touchdown in that first game. Swift did play well first time around, so maybe it works out, but he mainly offers receiving value, and for him to go over 100 on the ground, I think is pretty unlikely. So not going to bet on it. I think it's enticing, but probably too risky to work out. At number 29, another flex play with a chance to work out would be Rhamondre Stevenson versus the Bills, and last week he was terrible against the Chargers, but 13 touches, 1 catch for 73 yards and a touchdown. The week before, in week 16 at Buffalo, he did offer 13.8 fantasy points instead. So maybe it works out. Stevenson has been better at home this season, but given it's the Patriots offense, I'd rather bet against it. No thank you, but in the top 30, maybe you'll consider it. In the same game, back-to-back, I got Ray Davis and Ty Johnson at New England, number 30 and 31, and I'm really not sure what's going to happen with James Cook. If James Cook scores 2 touchdowns this week, then he breaks O.J. Simpson's record for rushing touchdowns in a season. So maybe that's what happens, but I would doubt it. I would expect Ray Davis and Ty Johnson to really split the backfield for the majority of the game. I don't envision more than 1 or 2 drives for James Cook and the Bills starters. So I would rather pivot to Ray Davis and Ty Johnson. There's some upside here, but with Mitchell Trubisky, what's really going to happen? I have a hard time telling you for sure who is the guy. I think Ray Davis will get the early down touches, and then Ty Johnson is the change of pace option, probably gets more receptions. One of them might score a touchdown, maybe both, but I'd probably avoid it given I don't know for sure what will happen. Then at 32, I have Travis Etienne at the Colts, and in week 5 versus Indianapolis, he had 12 touches, 6 catches for 60 yards, and that's 9 points. And I kind of feel like that's a best case scenario for Etienne this week. I think it's more of a Bigsby game. And while the Colts are a top 5 matchup, there's just such random usage for Etienne this week. I'd rather pass on it. I don't think he's a safe play. More of a low-end flex option. Similar value to guys like Ty Johnson and Ray Davis. Maybe it works out, but probably a little too risky to trust. At 33, maybe you'll consider Michael Carter versus the Niners because both James Conner and Trey Benson were placed on IR. And Michael Carter, the last 2 games, has been getting involved, mainly in the passing game, 7 receptions total, and he hasn't played a full bevy of snaps in either game, but 25 touches total as well. That's a decent floor. With 129 yards, he is averaging 8.2 fantasy points per game. That's a decent floor. You won't get burned by Michael Carter, but I doubt you go over 15 points. I wouldn't expect touchdowns from Michael Carter. At number 34, we also have another backup getting the start. We have D'Onta Foreman at Baltimore because Jerome Ford and Pierre Strong have both been ruled out. Neither practiced, neither will play, and D'Onta Foreman going to get all of those snaps. Any chance at a touchdown would go to D'Onta Foreman, but that's all you're betting on against the Ravens, who have really stepped up on defense lately. I would not trust it. I would pass on D'Onta Foreman, but maybe you get an 8-point floor like Michael Carter. At 35, this is the last player I would consider this week, and it kind of feels risky, but it's a must-win for the Atlanta Falcons, and Tyler Allgeier really played well against them back in week 6. Against Carolina on the road, he had 19 touches, 1 reception, 108 yards, and a touchdown. That was with Kirk Cousins, but still with Penix. I could see them running the ball like crazy this week. He had 17.3 points back in week 6, and if you're going to swing for the fence with a backup, I would consider Tyler Allgeier in my lineup this week. But they have been really relying on Bijan Robinson the last 2 games, and that's why I'm not willing to rank him any higher. But from a ceiling perspective, the Panthers matchup has been the best all season long. There's a ton of upside here, and it wouldn't shock me at all if they do give Tyler Allgeier 15 plus touches again. So it could work out. He's the last player in this flex territory, but I'd probably pass on it. I'd probably avoid it. I don't feel safe starting any of these running backs, honestly, in this tier from 24 to 35, but beggars can't be choosers. Good luck if you have to rely on one of them. But the rest of the way, even if they're the starting running back, I'm going to bench him for sure. Miles Sanders at the Falcons is not a player I trust. He was full in practice on Wednesday. He's expected to return from IR, and both Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks are not active. So Miles Sanders will get the bulk of the volume. He's going to be more involved than Raheem Blackshear, but still, I don't trust him. If it's not Chuba Hubbard, then the Panthers running backs have really sucked otherwise this season. So no thank you with Miles Sanders. I'll bench him for sure. And then in New Orleans, it looks like neither Alvin Kamara nor Kendre Miller are practicing, and neither will play, in my opinion. So that means Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to get the start. They only acquired him a couple weeks ago, but last week he did get some volume. And CEH is a no-go, in my opinion. I do not trust the Saints offense at all. With Spencer Rattler, it's going to suck. And against the Bucks, who have an elite run defense right now, CEH will be terrible. So no thank you at all. While he is going to start the game, I have no desire to start him in fantasy. At 38, Brian Robinson Jr. has fallen off a cliff lately. In his last 3 games, with Ekeler not on the field, Brian Robinson Jr. is terrible. He has no touchdowns. That was his calling card this season, the only reason to start him, and only 3.4 yards per carry. That is terrible. That is not going to get it done, and it's a reason why he's coming off the field a lot for guys like Jeremy McNichols and Chris Rodriguez. So he's in a major slump since the bye week. I would only trust Ekeler this week. In Washington, I'm not starting Brian Robinson Jr. at this point. Then I have all 3 Broncos running backs, Jaleel McLaughlin, Javonte Williams, and Audric Estime, all back-to-back-to-back here versus the Chiefs, and it's a terrible matchup for all of them. But Chris Jones and maybe more players on defense will not suit up. They are going to be benching starters, and maybe the running backs can capitalize. But the Chiefs have had the toughest running back defense all season long. I still have major concerns here. I still think the Chiefs can win the game, but the Broncos running backs are mainly just so unpredictable. That's why I'm not trusting either of them. I have no idea for sure who will score a touchdown, if any of them, and you can't tell me definitively who gets the most volume. It could be McLaughlin, it could be Javonte, it could be Estime again, and it will probably rotate from drive to drive who is the main option in that backfield. So I have no desire to take that risk. I think all year long, the Broncos running backs have been major liabilities, and there's no chance you're starting them in the fantasy championship. There's also a chance that Alexander Mattison does crack your lineup, though. At 42, he's the last player in this tier, and this tier does account for a scenario where they do play well. But the only chance I have to start Mattison is if Ameer Abdullah does not play. Abdullah did not practice Wednesday with a foot injury. As I'm recording this Thursday, I don't know what his practice status is, and only if Abdullah sits would Mattison be a safe play. But last week, he really lost total control of this offense. Ameer Abdullah had 5 times as many touches as Mattison, so I'm not going to start him if Abdullah is available. I think even if he does start, he's not been very good this season. Against the Chargers, I would expect comparable value to a guy like Michael Carter in Arizona. I would only rank Mattison about 10 spots higher, running back 32, 33, something like that. And that's probably not worth starting either. It's a low-end flex play at best. So probably bench him. I'm not going to start him. But if you're relying on Abdullah, maybe you need Mattison on the bench if you can't find another option. I doubt it, though. I'd much rather just go Kenny Gainwell off the wire or Blake Corum instead. So that's it for all the running backs I think you can consider, but I always give you the top 50. Here they are. I have Jeremy McNichols at Dallas in the next tier, and maybe he scores a touchdown. If Ekeler doesn't play, I'd be bumping him up. Then Sean Tucker probably gets some touches in the second half, assuming they blow out the Saints and they want to give Bucky Irving and Rachaad White some rest. Last week it happened. It might happen again. And Keaton Mitchell might actually be very valuable if Justice Hill does not play. We mentioned some chance that Derrick Henry sits after he scores a touchdown. If Justice Hill is still in the concussion protocol, then the handcuffed to roster would be Keaton Mitchell. I could consider ranking Keaton Mitchell top 25 if you told me that Justice Hill does not play, but probably not going to do it right now. I would expect Justice to probably be on the field if he can clear the concussion protocol in time. Then we have Dameon Pierce at Tennessee, and maybe they bench Mixon, but it doesn't sound like it with Mixon's incentives. I doubt Pierce has much volume this week. Then 47 is Cam Akers versus Seattle, who sometimes vultures a touchdown, but not going to bet on it. Then Carson Steele might have some work alongside Samaje Perine, but he's been bad this season. I wouldn't trust him. Then Antonio Gibson occasionally gets involved in New England, but the offense has such a low ceiling, I will bench him as well. And then lastly, Devin Singletary. The only thing you're hoping for here is for him to vulture Tyrone Tracy on the goal line. So those are my running back rankings this week. Here are the top 40 on the screen. And I think if you have the top 5, you have a shot at 20 points in terms of floor. I would trust them for sure in my lineup. Then the top 13, I think, are all the players you have to start expecting to get major volume and high upside this week. I think they're the safe plays. However, 14 through 23 are really the only other guys I would probably expect to go over 10 points. I think it's pretty gnarly in terms of trust after that point. 24 through 35 are tempting, all have a path for success, but probably don't crack 10 plus points. I'd probably be trying to bench them if I can. The only handcuffs off the waiver wire I'm dying to start would be Kenny Gainwell, Blake Corum, Justice Hill if healthy, along with Ameer Abdullah, Zack Charbonnet, and maybe, just maybe, Austin Ekeler if he's active this week. Otherwise, good luck with guys like Khalil Herbert, Samaje Perine, Ray Davis, and Ty Johnson. Michael Carter, D'Onta Foreman are all very risky options in my opinion. I'd rather bench them if I can. So those are my rankings. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. There will be more of this content next season for sure, but even in the off season, I will give you plenty of gems, plenty of videos to keep the content going. So hope you enjoyed this season. I hope I help you make it to the fantasy championship, and good luck this week. I hope you take home the trophy. My name's Adam Riancho. Thank you so much for watching. Nice and blunt.